Prime Minister Trudeau, it is my great pleasure to warmly welcome you back to Davos. With so much snow, you must clearly feel at home. Canada, under your leadership, has strengthened its position in the world as a beacon of openness, inclusion, and multiculturalism. You have often stated that differences make us strong, proving that diversity is not just a moral driver for our society, but also a strong economic principle. You have personally championed diversity in both your outlook and policies, starting with your gender-balanced cabinet and continuing with your government's policies around workplace harassment, gender-based violence, and a feminist international development policy. This year, you join us in an additional capacity as chair of G7 presidency. The interconnections between climate change, migration, and security are clear. A strong political leadership is key to driving progress on issues of global commons. Prime Minister, we are all keen to hear your vision for Canada's leadership in shaping a shared narrative for an inclusive future. Prime Minister.
Mesdames et Messieurs, bonsoir à tous. Merci, Børge, pour cet accueil chaleureux. C'est un honneur pour moi.
It's an honor for me to be here in Davos. I'd also like to thank our co-chair of this year, Sharon, Fabiola, Isabel, Christine, Ginny, Chetna, and Erna.
Now, it won't surprise you that my remarks today will address the importance of progressive values in the context of globalization. You'll need the translations later, so you might as well keep them out. So before I begin, but fully in keeping with the speech I'm about to give, today I'm pleased to announce that Canada and 10 other remaining members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership concluded discussions in Tokyo, Japan, on a new, comprehensive and progressive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP. The agreement reached in Tokyo today is the right deal. Our government stood up for Canadian interests, and this agreement meets our objectives of creating and sustaining growth, prosperity, and well-paying middle-class jobs today and for generations to come. We're pleased with the progress we've made to make this deal more progressive and stronger for Canadian workers on intellectual property, culture, and the automotive sector. Trade helps strengthen the middle class, but for it to work, we must ensure that the benefits are shared with all of our citizens, not just the few. The comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership is a new step on that path. I also want to specifically and personally thank Prime Minister Abe for hosting the recent talks and for his continued and extraordinary leadership in reaching this positive outcome. Je suis heureux d'annoncer aujourd'hui que le Canada et les 10 autres membres
and the other 10 members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Progressive and Global Partnership, have concluded their negotiations in Tokyo. This is a good agreement for Canadians because it will create employment and prosperity for the middle classes. We are very proud to have reached this unanimous agreement with all the partners on culture and to have achieved progress for the automobile sector and intellectual property. Thanks to our ongoing efforts, we have been able to achieve an ambitious and a progressive agreement for all Canadians.
But it's also a great day for progressive trade around the world. So I was last here at the World Economic Forum in 2016, a mere 2 months after being sworn in as Prime Minister. Now it's been 2 years that I've been Prime Minister, and while that might not seem like such a long time, in this new era of perpetual change that we're living in, 2 years might as well be a lifetime. Think about it. The pace of change has never been this fast, yet it'll never be this slow again. There's enormous opportunity and enormous potential in that realization. Technology has always brought such promise. A better standard of living, new innovations, remarkable products. Consider the progression from steam power to electricity to computers. But it also brings dramatic shifts in our social, economic, and political cultures. This current step, involving automation and AI as the obvious examples, will totally revolutionize the world of work, and in many ways, it already has. As business leaders, I know that you view these as both exciting and challenging achievements. You're rightly anxious about how quickly our existing business models are being disrupted. Still, if you're anxious, imagine how the folks who aren't in this room are feeling. Workers, people who aren't seeing the benefits of economic growth, regular women and men who are trying to grab a rung on the career ladder. Companies avoid taxes and boast record profits with one hand while slashing benefits with the other. But that approach can't and won't cut it anymore. Les gens se sentent à l'écart.
They're angry, and they blame the public and private sectors. We are witnesses of a very important moment, but we cannot afford to repeat the mistakes of the past. Economic growth should and must generate benefits, real benefits for our communities. Trade agreements must, day in, day out, provide better occasions and opportunities for our citizens. And companies must take seriously their obligations towards workers, the workers who are at their service, and towards the communities that support them.
We're in a new age of doing business. You need to give back. Yet all of their stakeholders, including shareholders, employees, customers, and the communities in which they operate. Now, I understand that the burden of change falls heavy, and you cannot be expected to solve all the ills of the world on your own. But sitting back and hoping some other corporation or some other country volunteers to take the lead on this will get us nowhere. We have to drive this change, each and every one of us. Forums like this one are a great way to talk about how we can best work together to fulfill our duty to serve. We cannot neglect our responsibility to the people who matter most, to the people who aren't here in Davos and never will be. Those are the people we're working for. Those are the people who must be our priority. If we do nothing, and if we operate in the mindset of business as usual, the system will break down and we will all fail. We all know that to be competitive in the modern economy, change is imperative. And the grassroots desire for change is there. It's always been. But it's on us to flip the switch. We know what needs to be done. It is well past time that we listen, learn, and finally lead. Of course, this kind of profound societal change can seem overwhelming and lead us all to wonder where even to begin. So I'd like to focus tonight on a fundamental shift that every single leader in this room can act on immediately. One that I've made a central tenet of my leadership. One that is core to this year's forum thanks to the leadership of our 7 exceptional co-chairs. I'm talking about hiring, promoting, and retaining more women. And not just because it's the right thing to do or the nice thing to do, but because it's the smart thing to do. In Canada, like all over the world, much of the economic and labor force growth we've experienced over the last many decades is because of women entering into and changing the workforce. United States GDP. And in China, the GDP boost could be as much as 2.5 trillion, which is bigger than the entire Canadian economy. Mesdames et messieurs, when we talk about getting more women into the workforce, the issue of pay equity comes up, and it should. It's vitally important. In Canada, we'll be moving forward this year with legislation to ensure equal pay for work of equal value at the federal level. And I'm sure there's a few of you in the opportunity, or equal treatment, or equal sacrifice. Paying a female employee the same as a male employee doesn't even begin to touch issues around family planning, promotions, or job security. Women do more part-time work and more unpaid work than men. So how do we address that? See, when we dig a little deeper, when we peel back that outer layer, we see that there are a whole host of barriers facing women in the workplace. Removing those barriers will take effort, leadership, and a willingness to change the nature of work as we know it. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? Que pouvons-nous faire? Comment accroître
increase the representation of women within companies? And, more importantly, how do we ensure that they stay in their positions? Well, we need to fundamentally rethink corporate culture so that women feel more at ease, that they feel backed up and given the value to which they are entitled.
It's time to take a serious look at parental leave and childcare policies. We should be encouraging women and men to make the best decision for their family situation. In Canada, we've given parents more options for parental leave and invested billions in affordable, high-quality childcare. But there's more to do. We've also introduced a really successful child benefit program that gives middle and low-income parents more money every month, tax-free, to help with the costs of raising kids. And since the Canada Child Benefit gives more money to those who need it most, the financial impact on single mothers has been significant. Last year, nearly 90% of single moms receiving the Canada Child Benefit earned less than $60,000 a year and received about $9,000 in total benefits, tax-free. And let's be clear, helping those families has been a key driver of Canada's recent stellar economic growth. Companies should have a formal policy on gender diversity and make the recruitment of women candidates a priority. You may remember that we introduced our country's first gender-balanced cabinet in 2015. The usual suspects complained, but guess what? 2 years later, Chrystia Freeland and Miriam Monsef, who are here this week, along with their many female colleagues in cabinet, are serving the country with great distinction and have elevated the level of decision-making and debate for everyone in cabinet and in government. As corporate leaders, consider a gender-balanced board or gender-balanced project teams. Anytime we're looking for a new hire, we should be identifying women candidates at a rate equal to men. In Canada, when we look to fill appointments, we work to recruit people who reflect the true diversity of our country. Et nous devons rendre les comptes.
And we have to show what efforts we are carrying out in an open and transparent manner. In fact, we're on the point of adopting a law which will force companies under federal law to divulge information regarding their diversity policies. For example, that will include the proportion between men and women in their boards of directors and in their top management levels. What are the other points that could be improved? We have to understand that responsibility to look after the elderly and other persons in our families who may be ill often falls to women. So we need to have a program which helps these people to contribute the financial difficulties engendered by lack of work, and that is an option that we should envisage.
And we have to recognize that aspects of intersectionality are always at play and require special and explicit attention. Here's an example. In 2016, among women who were newly appointed to the boards of Fortune 500 companies, 77% were white. Race, religion, sexuality, socioeconomic status, those are just a few of the ways that women are even further discriminated against. And finally, here's the really big one. Me Too. Time's Up. The Women's March. These movements tell us that we need to have a critical discussion on women's rights, equality, and the power dynamics of gender. Sexual harassment, for example, in business and in government, is a systemic problem, and it is unacceptable. As leaders, we need to recognize and to act to show that truly time is up. We must each have a well-understood, established process in place to file allegations of workplace harassment. And when we receive those complaints, we must take them seriously. As women speak up, it is our responsibility to listen and, more importantly, to believe. Folks, treat these not as piecemeal alternatives to how things are currently run. Treat these examples as fundamental and essential shifts in the way we operate. As governments and as corporations, we were entrusted with a platform and a voice. Let's use them. Last year, with our neighbors in the US, we established the Canada-US Council for Advancement of Women Entrepreneurs and Business Leaders. The Council just put out an important report, their first of 5, focused on supporting and growing women-owned businesses. We need to listen to them and implement it. Cette année, le Canada préside le G7.
Guiding the G7, the summit, which will take place in Charleroi, in Quebec. The advancement of women at the social, political, and economic level is an important aspect of our presidency. Gender equality and a comparative analysis between the sexes is part of the issues and activities that we will be carrying out under our G7 presidency, including during the ministerial meetings and at the summit of leaders of the G7. And I'm very happy to be able to announce that Melinda Gates and Isabelle Hudon are going to be the co-chairs of the Advisory Council for Gender Equality of the G7. These two women are strong voices for the advancement of gender equality and for the empowerment of women and girls, and they will ensure that gender equality will remain a priority in all that we do during the G7 meetings this year.
I'm pleased to announce that the co-chairs for the G7 Gender Equality Advisory Council will be Melinda Gates and Isabelle Hudon. Both of these women are global leaders in the advancement of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, and so will ensure that gender equality is a priority throughout everything the G7 does this year. 2018 will also see Canada hosting Fortune's Most Powerful Women International Summit, and 2019 will bring the Women Deliver Conference to Vancouver, the world's largest gathering on health, rights, and well-being of women and girls. So those are just a few examples of what we're doing to draw regular and frequent attention to the untapped potential of women and girls around the world. It's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing effort to convene, to challenge, and to push boundaries. But that's not to say we've got it all figured out. In Canada, we need more women in politics, more women on corporate boards, and more women in STEM. And that's, of course, just the tip of the iceberg. So, in reflecting on this, let me ask you, what are your challenges? And more importantly, what are you doing to address them? Ladies and gentlemen, the hiring, promotion, and retention of women is something we can make happen today, right now. More women in leadership positions won't just grow our economy, create jobs, and strengthen our communities. It'll also lead to innovation and change in the workplace. Innovation and change that workers desperately need. The unrest that we see around the world is palpable, and it isn't going away. These are uncertain times. We have a responsibility to address people's very real concerns. And the only way we'll get there is by listening to our workers and our citizens, and we will create solutions that will actually stick. The people in this room are immensely privileged. We owe it to society to use this privilege for good. We should ask ourselves, do we want to live in a world where the wealthy hide in their gated enclaves while those around them struggle? Or do we want to help create a world grounded in the notion of fairness? Because right now, we are in real danger of leaving to our kids a world that is less fair than the one we inherited from our parents. And I know we can do so much better. Progress of any kind takes hard work. But by thinking big and working together, we will build a better world. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Mr. Prime Minister, and also thank you for your very convincing and inspiring speech, and I would compliment you for especially raising the issues related to gender equality, and the situation for women and girls around the world, and that you will make this also an important part of your G7 presidency, I understand?
Yes, very much. Over the past number of years in forums like these, there's been a recognition that we're facing real challenges around global growth, although it is turning around somewhat. But as we look for where those next elements of growth, and that's going to be central to the G7.
So how are you going to use your G7 presidency to also make sure that we will get more inclusive and job creating and sustainable globalization, a more fair world, as you mentioned?
Well, the G7 is made up of nations that have different ideologies in their governments at certain moments, but share a broad set of values and approaches as developed economies. We are countries that understand that making sure that growth helps everyone is something that all of us, in various ways, as G7 leaders, got elected on. There's all sorts of different approaches to try and do it, but my approach, the Canadian way, is always to try and find common ground, find the ways in which we can agree that boosting women's participation in the workforce, which has been universally supported by all G7 nations as a major theme this year, as a way to help ordinary citizens, to help people grow their opportunities, is something that we will always work to challenge and push to go further. But I'm looking forward to finding a lot of common ground.
Prime Minister, you also had some news for us. At the beginning of your speech, you let us know that you successfully finished the TPP trade deal, Asia and Canada. I believe this can be very consequential, especially based on what you said. Could you say 2 words about what you think this TPP deal that you just signed can mean for jobs, but also for opportunities for growth moving forward? Because there are some skepticism related to how job-creating these deals are.
Well, I mean, we're seeing a lot of trade skepticism around the world in general right now. People are worried or increasingly have become convinced that trade deals benefit the few, not the many. Benefit a country's bottom line, benefit multinationals, but don't benefit ordinary workers. And there have been examples of that in the past. And the challenge that Canada, fundamentally as both a progressive and a trading nation, has faced is how do we put those two things together? And our first big challenge when we came into office, and it was very much on my mind last time I was here 2 years ago, was moving forward that we knew we had to tweak. And there were difficult negotiations. I think a number of people remember the challenges we all faced in Vietnam. But we knew that if we're going to move forward on a trade deal, we have to demonstrate convincingly that it's in the best interests of our citizens and that it can really be a win-win-win for all partners. That's what we're working very hard on in NAFTA, and I know that the work we were able to do with our fellow CPTPP partners in getting to this point is going to be good, not just for Canadians, but for citizens of the entire group of 11 countries in Asia that are part of this. I mean, this is an example of the pushback against globalization and anti-trade and closing off, that you can move forward, but you need to include the things that citizens care about if they're going to get support for trade. And it's not easy. It would have been easier for us to just say, okay, fine, trade is important, we'll sign in and we'll try and figure it out later. But if we're going to push back against the anti-trade tendency in globalization that will leave us all worse off, we have to put the concerns and the well-being of our ordinary citizens at the center of what we are negotiating. And that's what all 11 of us have been able to do with the CPTPP.
Yeah, you're very convincing. Do you think it's such a good deal that you can later on see your neighbor in the south also joining?
We're working very hard to make sure that our neighbor to the south recognizes how good NAFTA is and that it has benefited not just our economy, but his economy and the world's economy. But we're also very much open to more trade deals involving more people, as long as it's in the best benefit of all of our citizens.
Last question, Prime Minister. It's 2 years almost since you were in Davos. You had been Prime Minister for a couple of months. You have had this big responsibility for 2 years. What has surprised you most in this job? And with experience now after 2 years, what is your main aspiration moving forward?
Well, I'm sort of pleased to be at this point where I look back at the speech I gave 2 weeks or 2 months into being a Prime Minister here at Davos that was filled with lofty progressive ideals and how we need to challenge ourselves, and be able to come back 2 years later and say, well, those lofty progressive ideals we put 40 days still, but having more specific examples to point to share our success and to perhaps encourage or inspire other folks in this room and as corporate leaders or as political leaders to look at what's been going on in Canada and take that on. I'm feeling confident that we're definitely onto something here in Canada, and I've got a great team working hard on delivering it, and the more we can work together, not just as a country, but as a world, on the kinds of things that really, really will matter to our kids and grandkids, the better off we'll all be.
Merci bien. Thank you so much.
Merci, Børge.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated for the upcoming session.